somewhere far beyond what any telescope can see, past the filaments of galaxies stitched across the dark fabric of space, beyond even the whispers of microwave background radiation that echo the birth of everything, there is a silence. A silence so complete it cannot be measured, only imagined. Picture standing at the outermost edge of reality itself, where light grows tired and time loses its meaning. Now ask yourself, what lies beyond that? Is there a wall, a curtain, a veil, or perhaps nothing at all, not even the idea of nothing? Before we begin, take a breath, and if you can, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. We're traveling far tonight, and it's good to know who's out there, watching the edges with us. The question sounds like something from a child's dream or a philosopher's thought experiment. What happens if someone reaches the end of the universe? But this question is older than stars and newer than the latest supercomputer simulations. It has haunted ancient myths and modern science alike. From the ancient belief in celestial spheres surrounding the Earth to the expanding universe proposed by Edwin Hubble, our concept of the edge of the cosmos has always mirrored our understanding of ourselves. But what does end really mean? In everyday life, an end is a boundary, a finish, a wall, or a shore. But in cosmology, ends are slippery. Our universe is expanding, a discovery made in the 1920s when galaxies were observed fleeing from us in all directions. That expansion isn't into empty space. Space itself is stretching, creating more space as it goes. Imagine ink dots on a balloon being blown up from the surface. Everything is getting farther apart, but there's no edge on that surface. You can travel forever in any direction and never hit a wall. And yet, we ask, could there still be something out there? A final border? A place where the laws of physics falter, or perhaps change entirely? Some scientists believe the universe may be finite but unbounded, like the surface of a sphere, but in higher dimensions. You could sail through space for billions of years and return to where you started, having never touched an edge. But others suggest more exotic possibilities. There are theories, unproven but tantalizing, that suggest the observable universe, what we can see, is just a small patch within a much grander structure. What if there are multiverses, stretching out like bubbles in a cosmic foam? In this view, reaching the end of our universe might not be reaching a wall, but a thinning a place where the fabric of our reality frays and another universe begins. In 2003, physicists Laura Mersini-Houghton and Richard Holman proposed an astonishing idea: that anomalies in the cosmic microwave background could be scars from collisions with other universes. Not proof, not yet, but fingerprints, perhaps, of something bigger than everything. Of course, our ability to test such ideas is limited by the very nature of the universe. The further we look, the older the light. The edge of what we can see is not a place, but a time about 13.8 billion years ago, when light first broke free from the thick fog of the early universe. This horizon is called the surface of last scattering. Beyond it, we cannot see, at least not yet. But visibility is not reality. The universe extends far beyond our observational horizon, perhaps infinitely, or perhaps not. There are models of a closed universe, where all space is curved back on itself like the surface of a four-dimensional sphere, a strange geometry where direction loses, meaning and distance becomes circular. Let's imagine, just for a moment, that some future traveler managed to survive long enough or travel fast enough to approach this edge. Perhaps with the help of technology we haven't yet dreamed, or by folding space itself through wormholes or cosmic tunnels. What would they find? Would there be a transition, a place where matter thins and time slows, and the stars begin to vanish from the sky? Would they find an event horizon of sorts, like the one surrounding a black hole, where crossing over means leaving behind all known physics? Or would they find something even stranger, a place where the constants of nature begin to drift, where gravity behaves oddly, or where the fabric of space is not smooth but torn, bubbling with quantum uncertainty? In the early 21st century, string theory emerged with the suggestion that our universe might be a brane, a three-dimensional slice floating in higher dimensional space. According to this view, what we call the universe is just one membrane in a higher dimensional cosmos. Others might lie close by, separated by tiny, invisible gaps. And if so, what lies between the brains? What separates one universe from another? The physicist Brian Greene once said, "The fabric of the cosmos is a lot more flexible than we ever imagined." Indeed, in some versions of this theory, reaching the edge of our universe might mean entering a place where that fabric twists, rips, or tunnels elsewhere. Not a wall, a threshold. Still, others propose that there is no edge because the universe is like a hologram, its three dimensions projected from a two-dimensional boundary at its outermost limit. This holographic principle, first suggested by physicist Gerard 't Hooft and expanded by Leonard Susskind, implies that everything we experience may be encoded at this far boundary. In that case, the end of the universe might be more fundamental than we think, not the end of space, but the edge of reality's code. There are other theories, too lesser known, but no less strange. Some suggest that the speed of light might vary near the edges, not remain constant. Others entertain the idea that time itself may slow, halt, or even reverse. What if, at the edges of creation, the rules dissolve, and something wholly alien awaits not just new physics, but new logic, new dimensions, a complete rupture from anything we could imagine? Perhaps this is why we've never found the edge. Not because it doesn't exist, but because we wouldn't recognize it even if we were standing on it. A line in the sand written in invisible ink, whispering its boundary to particles in languages we don't yet speak. So where does that leave us? On a planet spinning in a medium-sized galaxy, drifting through a sea of dark energy, part of a universe we barely understand, and yet we look outward. We wonder what happens at the very edge, not out of fear, but out of longing. Because to seek the edge is to seek the limit of possibility. And perhaps to find that it moves every time we approach it. Maybe that's the point. That we are part of something endless, not because space has no boundary, but because our questions do. And so we drift, on this cosmic raft, propelled by curiosity, staring into the deep night, asking over and over, not because we expect an answer, but because the asking itself makes us feel alive. If there is an edge to the universe, then perhaps there is a path, not paved with stone or metal, but with questions. And questions, like stars, burn brightest in darkness. The journey toward the edge doesn't begin in rockets or observatories. It begins in silence. In the moment between thoughts, when the mind stretches out beyond its borders and tries to feel the shape of the unseen. It begins when someone dares to ask not where we are, but what we are inside of. What holds the stars in their quiet dance? What anchors gravity? What dreams up the rules? Let us look again at space not as a thing, but as a presence, a texture, a stage, one that is not empty, but woven with potential. Quantum physicists tell us that even in a perfect vacuum, something stirs. Pairs of particles blink into existence and then vanish. Virtual fluctuations of energy, brief tremors in what we once called nothing. Perhaps nothingness is just something that hasn't decided what it wants to be yet. And if nothing is truly nothing, then from where did this everything come? Some believe the universe began from a singularity, a point of infinite density and zero volume. But a point is not a place. It is an idea, a paradox. A reminder that the origin of everything may be beyond comprehension. Still, the echo of that beginning reaches us across time, the cosmic microwave background, the soft whisper of the Big Bang. Every corner of the sky glows faintly with that ancient light stretched and cooled across billions of years, but still there, like memory. In 2019, researchers at MIT and Harvard examined the fine irregularities in this background radiation. They found that space, in its first flickers of time, might have vibrated with patterns we don't yet fully understand, harmonies from the edge of physics. Were those vibrations signs of inflation, the rapid stretching of space, or were they ripples from other realities brushing against ours? The inflation model proposed by Alan Guth suggests that just after the Big Bang, the universe expanded faster than light, ballooning outward like a breath held too long. But even this model hints at something eerie, that our observable universe may be just one tiny patch in an infinite fractal, a foam of expanding domains, each with different laws, different constants, perhaps different dimensions. What does that mean for the traveler? Perhaps as they journey toward the so-called edge, they do not find a border, but a phase shift like water freezing into ice, like sound becoming silence. The air would not thin, for there is no air in deep space, but the quantum fields might begin to hum a different tune. The rules may become inconsistent, familiar particles may vanish or mutate. Time may flutter. Imagine a place where the speed of light is not 792 kilometers per second, but slower or infinitely fast, where gravity doesn't attract but repels, where space no longer curves but fractures. What would it feel like to approach that place? Would your instruments begin to lie? Would your thoughts begin to twist? This is not science fiction. It is science wondering about itself. In the 1980s, the concept of a false vacuum gained attention. It proposes that what we perceive as the stable vacuum of space is not the most stable state possible, only a local minimum. Somewhere out there, or somewhen, a more stable vacuum could emerge. If that were to happen, it would spread at the speed of light, rewriting the laws of the universe as it goes. No warning, no escape, just a new physics washing over reality. Is the edge of the universe a place where such transformation begins or ends? In the halls of theoretical physics, some speak of a boundary condition, the ultimate question in cosmology: what defines the shape, fate, and future of the universe? Is space closed or open, flat or curved? Does it loop back on itself like a snake eating its tail? Stephen Hawking once proposed that time itself might behave differently near the beginning or the boundary of the universe, becoming imaginary in a mathematical sense. If time can curve, then perhaps edges are illusions. Perhaps we exist not in a line, but in a loop, a thought curled in upon itself. Yet, the mystery persists. Observations of distant supernovae and the movement of galaxies reveal something unexpected. The universe's expansion is accelerating, as if pushed by an invisible wind. This force, dubbed dark energy, makes up roughly 68% of the cosmos, and we have no idea what it is. Could it be a sign that the universe is growing towards something, or fleeing from something behind it? Some theorists have wondered, what if the universe is not expanding into nothing, but into something, a deeper substrate, a hidden framework, a pre-universe? And what if, just beyond the curtain of what we can measure, this framework is folding, shifting, waiting? In ancient cultures, the edge of the world was where monsters lived, where ships fell, where maps ended. But now our monsters are subtler. They are equations that cannot be solved, constants that do not stay constant, observations that refuse to make sense. The edge of the universe is not a place on a map, but a hole in our understanding, a margin filled with silence. Imagine standing at that edge. There are no stars, no planets, just a gray field of dark matter, whispering its presence through its pull on galaxies. Then even that disappears. The background radiation fades. Temperature nears absolute zero. Time seems to stretch like taffy, then thin, then still. You raise your hand, and your fingers blur, not from motion, but from probability. You are no longer in a place, you are in a question. A frontier where the laws you lived by take off their masks, and something else stares back. Would it speak? Would it understand? Or would it simply be vast, unmoved, impersonal, the original silence from which the universe was born? This is not a horror. It is not even a mystery. It is awe, the kind that makes the heart quiet, the kind that makes a person feel very small and very lucky to have lived in a place where questions could be asked at all. And so the traveler does not return, not because they are lost, but because the edge is not a gate, it is a mirror. And when you reach it, you see not what's beyond the stars, but what the stars were always trying to show you. That space is not just distance, it is meaning, and meaning does not end. The night sky is not black, it is soaked in ancient light. Even in the deepest void between galaxies, photons wander, remnants of things long gone, of stars that lived and died before Earth even formed. These drifting messengers carry more than energy, they carry memory. And in their quiet shimmer lies a truth few dare to say aloud: that we are surrounded not by emptiness, but by echoes. The universe does not end in a wall. It ends, if at all, in a fading, a quieting, a shift from what is seen to what is sensed, than perhaps to what is only imagined. If someone were to travel far enough, long enough, in one direction past the reach of our radio signals, past the halos of galaxy clusters, beyond the point where even dark matter loses its grip, what would they encounter? Nothing? Or the very rules behind the something? To ask this is to tug at the veil of the unknowable. Let us begin not at the edge, but here where we stand, or sit, or wonder, on a planet suspended in just the right orbit within a galaxy that spins like a spiral fossil, in a universe that seems tuned with uncanny precision. The constants of nature, the speed of light, the strength of gravity, the charge of an electron are not random flukes, they appear finely balanced. If they were even slightly different, stars wouldn't shine, atoms wouldn't bind. Life, as we know it, would be impossible. Is this precision a coincidence? Or a signature? Some physicists, like Max Tegmark, have proposed that our universe is one of many a single verse in a vast multiverse. In this view, every possible configuration of physical laws exists somewhere. There are universes with stronger gravity, universes where time flows sideways, universes where no matter ever formed. Ours is simply one that happens to allow observers a fluke, but a habitable one. But others sense something deeper, that perhaps the laws themselves are not laws at all, but emergent rising from something more fundamental. If you reach the end of the universe, do you reach the code beneath the cosmos? This idea is not without precedent. In the field of digital physics, thinkers like Edward Fredkin and Stephen Wolfram have speculated that the universe may be, at its core, computational. That beneath all motion and matter is a substrate of information, bits flipping, algorithms running, patterns unfolding according to invisible rules. Space, time, energy, all emergent properties of something simpler, something digital. If this is true, then the edge of the universe may be like the edge of a simulation, not a wall, but a boundary where resolution breaks down, where patterns loop or pixelate, a cosmic rendering limit. Of course, we cannot test this, not yet, but we can look for signs, for hints of discreteness, where there should be continuity, for patterns that repeat across scales, for noise that feels too quiet, too clean, and when we do, we find puzzles. The cosmic microwave background is one. It's not perfectly random. It contains alignments like the so-called axis of evil, a strange directional pattern in the radiation left over from the Big Bang. No one knows what it means. It could be coincidence, it could be contamination, or it could be a glitch. Then there's the problem of entropy. The universe is moving toward disorder, as thermodynamics demands. But it began in a state of astonishing order, low entropy, highly structured. Why? Who or what started the clock that way? Perhaps the edge of the universe holds that answer. Perhaps it is not a spatial limit, but a temporal one, a place where time begins to unravel, a seam where cause and effect reverse, a zone where the arrow of time folds back on itself like a ribbon of thought. We know that black holes bend time, that gravity slows clocks, that light cannot escape from certain places. But what if these distortions are not isolated accidents, but reflections of something larger? What if the universe, as a whole, is a kind of black hole, a bubble of space wrapped in a membrane of causal limits? In 2010, researchers exploring the holographic principle proposed that the universe might be encoded on a distant surface, that every event, every atom, is a projection from a boundary we cannot see. If so, then to travel to the end is not to find the projector, but to reach the place where the projection grows dim. What does dimness look like in space? It looks like the cosmic voids, vast regions with almost no galaxies, hundreds of millions of light years across. Cold spots in the sky, silent places where something seems to be missing. Could these be fractures? Gaps between folds in the universal weave? Perhaps the edge is not distant, but here woven into the spaces between particles, into the silence between heartbeats, into the gap between what is known and what is felt. Imagine a place where reality thins, where logic begins to falter, where up and down lose their meaning, where light no longer travels straight, but curves endlessly, trapped in geometries we can't draw. This is not a nightmare. It is a cathedral. The edge of the universe may not be where things end, but where they begin differently. And what happens to the traveler who reaches it? Maybe they don't fall, maybe they bloom. Maybe crossing the boundary of space is like waking up from a long dream, not into another world, but into a wider one, where all previous truths become metaphors, where the laws we cherished were just the local dialect of a vaster grammar. This is not the end of curiosity. It is the place curiosity was always leading us. We may never reach that edge. We may never know whether it lies ahead, or within, or all around us in forms too subtle for detection. But even so, the question changes us. It makes the universe larger, not because space grows, but because wonder does. The moment we ask what lies beyond the universe, we step outside the limits of what is and enter the realm of what could be. We become more than observers. We become echoes of the question itself. And in this way, maybe we are already at the edge, already touching it, already shaped by it. Because the end of the universe, if it exists, is not a place to be reached. It is a mystery to be felt. And the deepest mysteries do not end in answers but in silence that listens back. There's a place in the mind where words dissolve, where what we know loses shape and slips into wonder. That's where the question of the edge of the universe truly lives. Not in formulas, not in telescopes, but in that private moment when we stare into the sky and feel without knowing why that something is waiting out there, not watching, not speaking, just being. The great paradox of the cosmos is this: the more we understand, the more we realize how much we don't. Each new discovery widens the perimeter of the unknown. And the question of the universe's edge is not a boundary drawn in space, but a glowing contour around mystery itself. What happens if someone reaches that edge? Perhaps we should first ask, are we moving toward it, or is it moving with us? Our universe is not still. Galaxies fly apart. Space stretches. The very fabric of existence is in motion. The farther away something is, the faster it recedes from us. This is not because it's traveling through space, but because space itself is expanding between us and it. This concept, first hinted at by Hubble's observations and later described by the metric expansion of space, is hard to visualize. Imagine dots on a balloon being inflated. None of the dots are moving on their own, yet the distance between them grows. Now imagine you are one of those dots and wonder what lies beyond the rubber. Is there an outside to the balloon? Is there a space into which the universe expands? Standard cosmology says no. The universe is not expanding into anything. It's simply growing. The edges, if they exist, are not like cliffs or walls. They are more like horizons, always receding, always just out of reach. But what if that's not the full story? In 2020, a team of astrophysicists studying the cosmic acceleration proposed something provocative, that dark energy might not be uniform, but could vary with location and time. If true, it could mean that some regions of the universe expand faster than others, creating cosmic gradients or even vast zones of transition, boundaries not of matter, but of behavior, a patchwork cosmos. Imagine flying into such a boundary. At first, nothing changes, stars still shine, physics behaves as expected. But slowly, anomalies creep in. The fine structure constant a number that governs the strength of electromagnetic interactions begins to shift. Particles respond differently. Atoms vibrate in unfamiliar rhythms. Would this be the edge? Or simply a different district of reality? It's possible, some theorists suggest, that the universe contains domains pockets where different values of physical constants rule. They are separated by cosmic domain walls formed during early phase transitions in the universe. If you crossed one, you might not notice immediately, but over time, reality itself would feel off. And what if those domain walls are alive? Not in the biological sense, but in the sense that they evolve, that they respond, that they store information. Some physicists have speculated that domain walls may retain memory of the conditions in which they formed, that they might encode relics of ancient physics or contact points with other realities. If so, then, the edge of the universe could be a membrane of memory, a skin between worlds, vibrating with data from before space even settled into its current shape. What would happen to someone standing on such a threshold? Would they be torn apart by incompatible laws? Or would they become something new? Crossing the edge might not be like passing through a doorway, but more like dreaming in reverse, waking not into a brighter room, but into a darker one, where the rules are softer, the boundaries blur, and identity becomes porous. Imagine an environment where time does not move linearly, but like a tide, rising and falling, ebbing around consciousness like fog around a lamp, where direction has no meaning because space is not flat or curved, but recursive, where the traveler begins to see multiple versions of themselves ahead and behind echoes, not of the past or future, but of possibility. Such visions are not pure fantasy. In quantum cosmology, the concept of superposition doesn't just apply to particles, it can, in theory, apply to entire universes. The multiverse, in some interpretations, is not a collection of parallel realities neatly side by side, but a probabilistic cloud, a smear of potentialities. To reach the edge might be to enter that cloud, to become a quantum question awaiting observation. In this view, the end of the universe is not a location. It is a condition, a shift in ontology. Somewhere beyond the veil, the traveler is no longer an object in space, but a wave in possibility collapsing only when noticed, rising again in silence when left unmeasured. Does that sound like death? Or like birth? The mystics and physicists converge here unintentionally, perhaps, but unavoidably. One speaks of enlightenment, the other of symmetry breaking. Both hint at transformation, at a kind of dissolving that reveals rather than erases. We must remember that the universe we know, the one of stars and gravity and light, is not all there is. It is simply what survives observation, what remains when we open our eyes. What lies beyond that may be wild, disordered, or simply other. If there is an edge, perhaps it doesn't surround us like a cage. Perhaps it flows through us, a quiet frontier, braided into every moment of doubt, every breath of wonder. Maybe the edge isn't far away. Maybe it's inside the questions we can't stop asking. Because to reach the end of the universe isn't just to travel, it's to listen, to feel where language fails, to hold silence not as absence, but as presence too vast for sound. And maybe, just maybe, the edge is waiting not to be found, but to be understood. Like a secret we've always known. In the stillness between galaxies, where space grows cold and silence becomes absolute, the question lingers like a whisper that won't fade. What lies beyond? Not just beyond the stars, beyond the structure, beyond the code, beyond the idea of space itself. Somewhere in that thought is the seed of an even deeper question, not what lies at the end of the universe, but how we would even know we've reached it. Because the universe plays tricks. It stretches perception, it folds time, it builds illusions, not with malice, but with mathematics. And the closer we think we are to an answer, the more we realize we've been staring at a mirror, one reflecting back our assumptions. Let's start with what we do know. The universe is flat, or so our instruments suggest. Measurements of the cosmic microwave background, gravitational lensing, and the distribution of galaxies all point to a cosmos without detectable large-scale curvature. But what does flat mean when applied to the shape of everything? In geometry, flatness implies that parallel lines never meet, that the angles of a triangle always sum to 180 degrees, and that the rules of Euclidean space hold. On a cosmic scale, it implies something else entirely, that the universe might extend forever without bending in on itself like a sphere or looping around like a torus. But here's the catch. We can only measure what we can see, and what we can see is limited not by imagination, but by light. The observable universe is a sphere centered around us, about 93 billion light-years in diameter. But that sphere is not the universe. It is only our horizon. Beyond it lies more or possibly less, and we have no way of knowing which. Some cosmologists suspect the universe could be finite, but still unbounded. Like the surface of a balloon, it has no edges, yet is limited in size. If you traveled long enough, you'd eventually return to where you began, not because you hit a wall, but because space curved around you. But if space is infinite, then there is no return, only drift, only the endless deepening of distance. And yet, even infinite things can have edges, just not in the way we expect. Imagine walking through a dream. Everything feels real, but suddenly you sense that the dream is thinning. The shapes lose detail, the colors dim, the logic of space begins to stutter. You haven't reached a wall, you've reached the limits of coherence. Perhaps the edge of the universe is not a line, but a breakdown. A place where the algorithms that govern matter begin to decay, where the rules start to contradict each other, where the framework buckles under its own complexity. In this sense, the edge is not a thing to touch, it is a state to enter. In 2007, researchers studying chaotic inflation models proposed that our universe may have emerged from a larger inflating space, one that continues to spawn pocket universes through quantum fluctuations. Each of these bubble universes could contain its own physical constants, its own laws, even its own versions of reality. And ours, with its balance of light and matter, is just one drop in this endless foam. What happens if you travel to the boundary between these bubbles? In theory, a violent collision, a shock front, a discontinuity where incompatible realities clash. But perhaps there are gentler borders, smooth gradients, where one universe bleeds into the next, like dawn giving way to daylight. To reach such a boundary might be to enter a new kind of space, not empty, but pregnant, thick with potential, a liminal zone, a membrane of becoming. And what of the traveler? Would they survive the crossing? Perhaps not as they were. To step across the threshold of universes might be to shed identity, to dissolve into probability, to be rewritten by a new physics. Not death, not life, something else. Something we don't have words for. Maybe the edge of the universe is not something we can survive. Maybe it is something we become. There's a concept in theoretical physics called the null boundary, a surface of space-time beyond which no signals can escape. It's like the event horizon of a black hole, but for the universe itself, a limit not of space, but of communication. If such a boundary exists, it might surround the entire cosmos, containing us like a message in a bottle adrift on an endless sea. But then again, maybe we're not the ones inside the bottle. Maybe we're the message. If the universe has an edge, perhaps it is there to be read, to be found by something else, something beyond, something ancient or utterly new. Something that can interpret the data of a cosmos and extract from it a truth. And maybe that's what we're doing too. Reading the edge from the inside. Every theory, every measurement, every question, an attempt to trace the contour of the unseen. We may never reach the end of the universe physically, but intellectually, imaginatively, we orbit it. We brush against it in dreams, in equations, in moments of sudden aching awe. Perhaps this is what the edge is made of, the tension between what is and what could be, the thin light where certainty ends and wonder begins. One more thought. There is an idea, rare and radical, that the universe is not a physical structure at all, but a story, a process of unfolding meaning. And in that sense, its edge is not spatial, but narrative. Not a wall, but a punctuation mark. If so, then perhaps the end of the universe is not a place we reach, but a realization we come to. A moment when all the scattered pieces, time, space, matter, consciousness, cohere into something else. A final line, spoken not in words, but in the deep grammar of being. Maybe when we reach that edge, we don't look out. We look back and see the whole thing. There are moments when science brushes against the sacred, not because it invokes divinity, but because it arrives at silence, a silence so vast, so elegant, that words bow before it. The edge of the universe may be such a place. Not an ending, not a limit, but a silence. A horizon where language stops and listening begins. We often think of the universe in terms of distance, of coordinates, of scales. We measure its expansion in megaparsecs, its temperature in kelvins, its age in billions of years. But when we ask about the edge, we are not only asking about space, we are asking about understanding. Where does the knowable end? And what lies beyond? In the late 20th century, a strange idea began to take shape. One that continues to reshape cosmology in quiet, unsettling ways. That we may not be able to see the whole universe, not because it is too far away, but because the universe is hiding itself. This idea emerges from the interplay between entropy, information, and horizons. According to general relativity, massive objects bend space-time. If a region of space contains enough mass, like a collapsing star, it can curve space-time so steeply that even light cannot escape. The result is a black hole. But a black hole isn't just a trap, it is also a limit, a place where information appears to vanish from our universe. Stephen Hawking challenged this in the 1970s. He showed that black holes radiate energy, now known as Hawking radiation. But this raised a paradox. If black holes evaporate and disappear, what happens to the information they swallowed? Quantum mechanics insists that information cannot be destroyed. But where does it go? This is the black hole information paradox, one of the deepest puzzles in physics. Now, stretch your imagination. What if the universe itself has an event horizon, a cosmic limit beyond which we cannot retrieve information, not because of distance, but because of nature? This leads us to the concept of the cosmological horizon, the boundary of what we can observe. Light beyond that horizon will never reach us, because the space between is expanding too fast. In other words, there are regions of the universe forever out of reach. To us, they are gone, lost beyond the horizon of observation. But are they truly gone? Or just hidden? The holographic principle, proposed by Gerard Hooft and Leonard Susskind, suggests that everything within a region of space can be described by information encoded on its boundary. If this is true, then the edge of the universe is not a distant frontier, it is right here, imprinted on the cosmic horizon that surrounds us. Think of it like this. The three-dimensional universe we experience might be a projection from a two-dimensional surface, much like a hologram. Every moment, every atom, every thought may already be written not in space, but on its shimmering skin. This is not metaphor. This is mathematics. And if true, it means that to reach the edge of the universe is to encounter the source of its projection, not a wall, but a boundary of information, a membrane where inside and outside lose meaning. So then what happens if someone reaches that boundary? Would they pierce it, pass through, or would they dissolve into the very information from which they were made? In 2022, researchers using simulations of early universe inflation began to notice something strange. That certain models produce domain boundaries, thin regions where different parts of the universe fail to stitch together smoothly. These seams, if they exist, might persist today as subtle distortions in the cosmic microwave background. If we could find them, we might be seeing the very stitching of reality, the places where the cosmos still holds its original tension. A traveler who approached such a seam might not see it with their eyes, but they might feel it, like pressure behind the walls of thought, like gravity's whisper turning unfamiliar, like time stepping sideways. But perhaps even that is too physical. Perhaps to reach the end of the universe is to reach a change not in location but in perspective. There is a thought experiment in physics known as the observer problem. In quantum mechanics, the act of observing influences the system observed. This is not mysticism, it is experiment. Electrons behave like particles or waves depending on how we watch them. Reality, it seems, responds to attention. So what if the edge of the universe is not something you find, but something that forms when you begin to look for it? A participatory horizon, a place that manifests only when questioned. Could it be that the universe does not end until we decide it does? That the final boundary is the one drawn by curiosity? If so, then the traveler is not a body in motion. The traveler is the question. And the edge is the answer not given, but mirrored. This brings us to one of the most poetic and unsettling ideas in physics, the anthropic principle. There are many versions of it, but at its heart, it says this: the universe must be such that it allows observers to exist. In other words, if the cosmos were any different, we wouldn't be here to ask about it. So the very fact that we're asking means we exist in a universe that permits questions. But what if it's more than permission? What if it's entanglement? What if we are not just in the universe, but of it not just products of its laws, but participants in its unfolding? Then the edge is not a thing we move toward. It is a thing we shape. With each thought, each question, each dream of what might lie beyond. Because if space is truly woven from information, and information is altered by attention, then our wondering isn't wasted. It's creative. It presses against the boundaries of what is, shaping what will be. So what happens when someone reaches the end of the universe? Perhaps they don't fall into the void. Perhaps they complete the sentence. And the universe, like a story waiting for its final word, breathes them in and becomes more than it was. Some questions echo through every generation, carried not just in minds, but in the bones of civilization. They appear in mythology, in science, in poetry. They shape how we build telescopes and temples. They teach us to look up. And one of those questions, perhaps the oldest of them all, is this: where does it all end? We build walls to keep things in. We draw borders to define ownership. But space, real space, refuses to be owned. It curves, expands, folds, and drifts. It humbles our maps. It mocks our fences. And the deeper we stare into its depths, the more we begin to suspect that the only real edge might be the one in our minds. But if there is a boundary out there, what would mark it? A shift in temperature? A collapse in time? A warping of space so severe that geometry itself forgets how to behave? Let us trace the question backward to where the idea of boundaries began. In the ancient world, cultures imagined the cosmos as a layered structure. The heavens arched above, the underworld yawned below, and Earth was a disk surrounded by water or flame or void. These models weren't just superstition, they were attempts to explain the limits of experience, to place the human within something comprehensible. And always, at the edge of these maps, dragons waited. Monsters, winds of chaos. Today, the monsters are quieter. They live in the uncertainties of quantum mechanics, in the equations of string theory, in the unresolved conflict between general relativity and the Planck scale. The edge of the universe now lives in our inability to reconcile the very large with the very small. That is where science meets myth again, because both are tools for approaching the unspeakable. Consider this: in some theories, space is not fundamental, it's emergent, an effect, not a cause. The "it from qubit" hypothesis, proposed by theoretical physicist John Preskill and others, suggests that space arises from entangled quantum bits correlations in information. If true, then what we perceive as a three-dimensional universe is just the visible shadow of a vast information-theoretic web. So the question becomes, what happens at the edge of entanglement? What happens when the fabric of information becomes too sparse to sustain space? Imagine flying into a region of the universe where entanglement dies, where the correlations that hold reality together begin to falter. You might not notice at first. Space would stretch slightly. Then more. Then something strange. Objects would lose their relationships. Gravity might drift. Causality could slip. Then silence. Not just the absence of sound, the absence of cause, of sequence, of structure, a kind of unweaving. And the traveler? Perhaps they would slow. Not from resistance, but from irrelevance. Movement loses meaning when direction dissolves. The body becomes still, not frozen but unwound, a memory dispersing. And yet, there may be patterns that persist even here. In the 1970s, Roger Penrose explored the concept of conformal cyclic cosmology, the idea that the universe goes through cycles, each ending in a smooth, empty expansion, which becomes the beginning of the next. In this model, the far future of our universe, once all matter decays and black holes evaporate, becomes indistinguishable from the Big Bang of a new one. What looks like the edge is actually a doorway, a full circle drawn through infinite time. In this view, reaching the end of the universe might not mean falling into nothing, but returning to something, not the same, but similar. Like a breath exhaled becoming the next inhale, slower, quieter, but still part of the rhythm. Maybe the traveler doesn't vanish. Maybe they arrive, not in a place, but in a possibility. There's an unsettling beauty in this, that what lies beyond the end is not darkness, but pattern, not void, but recurrence. And if recurrence is built into the structure of the cosmos, then perhaps memory is too. Could the universe remember itself? Could information echo not just across space, but across cycles? Some physicists argue yes. They point to the idea of soft hair on black holes, faint imprints of information on the event horizon. They argue that information can never be destroyed, only transformed. Encoded in radiation, etched in geometry, woven into quantum states. Then what about you? What about the traveler? If all information persists, if even the shape of your thoughts is recorded in the wrinkles of space-time, then perhaps reaching the edge is not oblivion. It is inscription. You become part of the universe's next version. Not a body, not a mind, a signature, a note in a song no one knows how to sing yet. In such a reality, death and distance become soft things, not ends but turns. The traveler steps through the boundary and becomes suggestion. Potential, a pattern waiting to re-emerge. And here, something remarkable happens. The edge of the universe, once imagined as a cold horizon, becomes something warm. It becomes home, not because it's where we started, but because it's where questions begin to rest. There is an elegance to that, a quiet dignity, that everything stars, planets, people might dissolve not in violence but in coherence, that the end could feel less like falling and more like completing a thought. So if someone reaches the end of the universe, perhaps they do not disappear. Perhaps they crystallize into meaning. Out here, where time begins to hesitate and space grows soft at the edges, something else starts to rise. Not fear, not certainty, but a kind of quiet awareness, a hum behind everything. The further we drift from the familiar, the less the universe feels like a thing to be measured, and the more it begins to feel like a thought unfolding. And if the universe is a thought, then what is thinking it? We've spent centuries searching for the structure of the cosmos, its origins, its rules, its composition. We've dissected light, mapped galaxies, and stared so deeply into equations that we began to see our own reflections. But the deeper the science becomes, the more it begins to resemble philosophy. And at the edge of the universe, that resemblance becomes impossible to ignore. What if the boundary we seek is not out there but within? What if, at the very limit of space, we find ourselves? Let's begin with a question so simple it becomes disarming. Why is there something rather than nothing? The vacuum is not empty. Even in deep space, far from stars and gravity, quantum fields seethe. Particles pop in and out of existence. Fluctuations dance in a blur of uncertainty. This chaos is not a defect, it's the canvas on which reality is painted, and from it, entire universes may emerge. That idea, the birth of reality from fluctuations, underpins some of the most powerful cosmological models. In these views, the Big Bang wasn't an explosion in space, but an eruption of space. From a quantum nothing, a state not of emptiness, but of undefined potential, the universe blossomed. Space, time, matter, energy, all emerging together in a single act of becoming. So what if this can happen again? What if, at the edge of our universe, the potential stirs once more? Some string theorists propose that our universe exists on a membrane within a higher dimensional bulk. If two such brains collide, the impact could release immense energy, birthing a new universe. This is the ekpyrotic model, a cosmic dance of surfaces in dimensions we cannot see. In this view, the end of our universe is not a death, but a gesture, a brushstroke in a painting too large for us to frame. But even this idea still assumes something, some laws, some space, some conditions beyond ours. So let us go further. What if the end of the universe is not the edge of something larger, but the collapse of definition itself? Imagine crossing a boundary where meaning unravels, where physics, as we know it, can no longer be described because the concepts we use, force, time, field, energy, no longer apply. They don't break, they simply dissolve, not into chaos, but into indifference, into a purity so complete it doesn't require form. Would a traveler even be able to witness this? Would witnessing still be possible? Perhaps they wouldn't see an edge, but instead, feel it. A soft cessation of structure, a calmness, a gravity that doesn't pull, but quiets. Where once there was noise, the spin of particles, the thrum of forces, now only stillness, not absence, not void, just a completeness that asks for nothing more. Could consciousness persist in such a state? Could awareness, detached from structure, remain as a kind of vibration, a flicker of self inside a sea of finality? Or would the traveler dissolve gently, like ink in water, into whatever lies beyond, no longer a person, but a question resting in the answer? Some theories dare to touch this. In loop quantum gravity, the fabric of space is not continuous but granular, made of tiny loops or quanta. Near singularities, like black holes or the Big Bang, space and time may lose their classical meaning and become a kind of probabilistic foam. In this foam, cause and effect may tangle, identity may blur. Perhaps the end of the universe is one vast, quiet ocean of this foam, an endless sea of proto-reality, where all things wait to be chosen. And what if that ocean dreams? Not as we do with minds shaped by biology, but in some deeper way. What if the universe itself is not just a physical structure, but a self-organizing pattern? A system seeking complexity, harmony, novelty? In this light, the edge is not a border. It's a breath. A long, slow inhale before something new begins. Consider this. Everything we know, every planet, every equation, every cell, is part of a cascade, a falling forward of cause into effect. But cascades do not go on forever. Eventually, the chain ends not with an explosion, but with a still point, a pause, a silence. And in that silence, something extraordinary can happen. Reflection. Maybe the edge of the universe is the moment the cosmos reflects on itself. The traveler, standing at the threshold, doesn't fall off or burn up. They arrive. They look back. They see the whole of space behind them, not as stars and galaxies, but as meaning, as purpose, as the slow unfolding of an idea vast enough to become a universe. And in that moment, perhaps the traveler understands that the edge was never meant to be reached. It was meant to be imagined. Because the act of imagining it, of stretching thought to the edge of existence, is what allows the universe to continue expanding, not in space, in story, in wonder, in the open arms of curiosity. So what happens if someone reaches the end of the universe? Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. Perhaps they arrive at a place where reality no longer asks what is true, but instead asks, what is beautiful? What if the end of the universe isn't something that happens in the distance, but something that happens in us? There's a point, beyond all horizons, where questions stop being about measurement and start becoming about meaning, where inquiry becomes a mirror, and the universe, instead of answering, just reflects. By the ninth step of this journey, we've left behind the comforts of orbits and elements, forces and fields. Now we are in the realm of patterns, abstract, primal, recursive. Here, space is not emptiness. It is relationship. Time is not a ticking clock, but a rhythm of transformation. And the edge? Maybe it's not where the universe ends, but where it forgets how to be separate. Let's walk back into science. Slowly, carefully. Let's remember that the laws we trust, Newton's gravity, Einstein's relativity, the standard model of particle physics, are all maps. Beautiful maps. But no map can contain the terrain entirely, and the closer you get to the edge of the terrain, the blurrier the map becomes. So it is with cosmology. We look out and we see uniformity. The cosmic microwave background, that afterglow of the Big Bang, wraps around us like a sphere of memory. But in that apparent smoothness, there are anomalies, cold spots, alignments, areas that seem to whisper, there is more. One such anomaly, a vast void, hundreds of millions of light years across, lies in the direction of Eridanus. It's colder than expected, too quiet. Some scientists have wondered, could it be a bruise left by a collision with another universe? A mark from a time before time? We cannot know, but we cannot unsee it either. And then there is dark energy, the silent engine of expansion. We know it's there. It pushes galaxies apart. It accelerates the growth of space. And yet, we don't know what it is. A field? A property of the vacuum? A placeholder for something else entirely? If dark energy is not constant, if it changes over time, then our universe may not expand forever. It may shatter. It may rip itself apart. This scenario is called the Big Rip. In it, the expansion of the universe accelerates to the point where it overcomes all forces. Galaxies first, then stars, then planets, then atoms, until finally, even space-time itself unzips. The edge, in this model, is not out there. It's everywhere, all at once, an end woven into the very structure of what is. But what would someone experience approaching such a moment? Would it feel like falling or like dissolving? Would awareness stretch or contract? Perhaps, in those final instants, the universe becomes translucent. The patterns behind reality flicker into view, constants flicker, symmetries warp, and for a heartbeat, the last one, you see the whole design. And then, it's gone. Or maybe not, because information is never lost. That's what quantum theory tells us. It can be scrambled, it can be hidden, but it cannot be destroyed. So maybe the traveler doesn't end. Maybe they are scattered like stardust in reverse across a new beginning. Think of the traveler now, not as a person, not even as a being, but as an idea carried forward by gravity and memory and hope. Their journey was never about finding a border. It was about becoming the question itself. And now they have reached the final abstraction, the soft wall at the edge of knowability. Where does thought go when it has no more boundaries? Perhaps it becomes space again. Perhaps it becomes the next verse in the cosmic song. In ancient Hindu cosmology, the universe is born, dies, and is reborn not once, but eternally. Creation is cyclical. A breath in, a breath out. The edge is never final. It is transitional. Modern physics is beginning to echo this. Some models propose that the singularity of the Big Bang is not a beginning, but a bounce, a rebound from a previous collapse. Time, in these models, does not start. It loops. And the edge of the universe is not a cliff, it is a hinge. A turn. A return. If this is true, then maybe the traveler's journey is not outward, but inward. Maybe what lies beyond the universe is not otherness, but recursion. Maybe to reach the edge is to re-enter the center, to be folded back into the seed of what always was. From galaxies to atoms, from atoms to quanta, from quanta to thought, and from thought back to the beginning. So what happens if someone reaches the end of the universe? Maybe they finally understand. Not everything, not in the way of answers, but in the way of peace. Because beyond all theories, all equations, all models, there is this, the act of wondering itself, and that may be the truest edge of all the horizon where questions end, not because they are answered, but because they are fulfilled. There comes a moment quiet and without warning when the pursuit of distance turns into the pursuit of depth, when the desire to see farther becomes the need to see more clearly. And that, perhaps, is what awaits at the edge of the universe. Not a final place, but a final gaze, a turning inward as vast as any galaxy. We've asked what happens if someone travels far enough, if they pass galaxies thinning like mist, if they move beyond the flicker of cosmic microwave background, beyond the warping of dark matter's invisible fingers. We've imagined their approach to a boundary that cannot be mapped, one that may not even exist in the way we expect. But what if, at the end of all space, they find not a wall, but a question, and not one asked by them, but of them? Because in reaching the universe's final coordinates, the traveler may no longer be measuring the cosmos. The cosmos may be measuring them. There's a strange symmetry in physics, one that threads through all its deepest theories. It's the idea that everything real is relational. Mass exists because there is another mass to respond to. Motion only exists in comparison. Time is not a ticking clock, but a sequence of events, and without events, time itself dissolves. So what if space only exists because we are in it? What if the universe only has an edge because we are willing to search for one? At the core of quantum mechanics lies the observer, not as a passive spectator, but as a participant. Observation changes outcomes. It doesn't just reveal its shapes. The wave function, that elegant blur of possibilities, collapses into a single state because it is observed. If that's true on the scale of particles, could it be true on the scale of existence? Could reaching the end of the universe be the moment when the universe finishes becoming? Not because of mass or motion, but because of meaning? Some physicists, and more than a few poets, have wondered if consciousness is not merely a passenger, but a co-creator of reality, that the act of awareness is somehow entwined with the act of existence. This is not science fiction. It is the edge of science itself, the place where logic becomes recursive, where reason starts to fold back on itself like a Mobius strip. Perhaps the traveler, standing at the final veil, finds that they are not the first, that the edge has been touched before, not by spacecraft, not by technology, but by minds, ancient ones, alien ones, or maybe ones that evolved in forms we'd never recognize, patterns of plasma, knots of gravity, echoes of thought encoded in magnetic fields. Maybe they too reached the limit. Maybe they too asked, "Is this all?" And maybe they too found something unexpected. The edge was listening. Let us pause here in this place beyond explanation and imagine what it means to be known by the universe. Not in the biological sense, not in the evolutionary struggle of survival, but in the quiet sense of recognition, to have traveled this far, to have stretched awareness across eons and emptiness, to have looked into the unknown and not turned away. Maybe the reward is not knowledge. Maybe it's not transcendence. Maybe it's reflection. Because what else could the universe offer if not itself? Maybe the edge is where the map and the mirror become the same. And in that mirror, what would the traveler see? Not coordinates, not answers, but every step they ever took, every time they looked at the night sky and felt it look back, every question that ever ached in them like a second heartbeat. Maybe the edge is made of questions, not as riddles, but as stars. Maybe it's questions all the way down. Somewhere, between science and metaphor, we find ourselves building bridges between the two. We imagine endings that are beginnings, boundaries that are invitations. We speculate on entropy and singularities, on closed time-like curves and conformal boundaries, but always we are chasing something else, the shape of wonder. The traveler does not reach the end of the universe because they want to escape. They go because they want to understand. And perhaps, in the final moments, understanding reveals itself not as knowledge, but as belonging, not as a theory, but as a homecoming. Because if the edge of the universe is not where things stop, but where they return, then the journey isn't a line, it's a circle, not one of repetition, but one of completion. And maybe that's all the edge ever was, a final turning inward, a moment of stillness, a whisper in the dark that says, "You've come far enough, now rest." So what happens if someone reaches the end of the universe? Maybe they do not find the unknown. Maybe they become it. There's a stillness that lives only in deep space, not the absence of sound, but the absence of rush, a place where time no longer hurries to be measured, where it drifts, like dust across a sunbeam no longer bound to a sun. If a traveler were to reach the edge of the universe, perhaps they would not arrive to a thunderous revelation. Perhaps they would arrive to this, a silence so full, it begins to speak. In that silence, they might realize something quietly devastating, that the universe was never about its size. It was about its story. And stories don't end at the edge. They end when the meaning completes its circle. Science has taught us to map. We chart forces in fields. We graph temperature fluctuations in the afterglow of the Big Bang. We name particles with the precision of a poet naming stars. But the universe refuses to stay inside those names. It's too soft for that, too wild. So here, at the imagined perimeter of all there is, the traveler is not met with fire or void, but with something far stranger, a mirror made of time. This mirror doesn't show faces. It shows paths. It reveals not who we are, but how far we've come to become it. And perhaps in that moment, quiet, unspectacular, but infinite, the traveler sees it, that the universe was not a thing to be reached, but a question to be carried. There's a concept in cosmology called the de Sitter horizon, a theoretical limit in an expanding universe dominated by dark energy. As the universe accelerates, the de Sitter horizon defines the farthest distance from which light will ever be able to reach us in the future. Eventually, everything we don't orbit, every galaxy, every cluster, every flicker, will vanish beyond this horizon, not by moving, but by being taken away by the expanding fabric of space itself. The edge of the universe may not be a place we travel to. It may be something that travels to us, quietly, inevitably, drawing its curtain of invisibility across the sky. We're not just moving toward the end is moving toward us. And what then? What happens when there is nothing left to observe? Some have imagined the heat death, a future where entropy claims every corner of existence. No structure, no temperature gradients, no light, just uniformity, stillness, an eternal gray. But perhaps that's not death. Perhaps that's rest. We are so used to thinking of endings as failures. But nature doesn't fear quiet. It seeks it. Galaxies burn so that black holes may bloom. Stars collapse so that space may sing. And the traveler? Maybe they're the final song. Maybe their arrival at the edge doesn't disrupt the universe, but completes it. There are whispers in theoretical physics of what might lie beyond a universe like ours. Some speak of baby universes, offshoots that bud from the quantum foam. Others speak of Euclidean wormholes, ephemeral passages between realities that never meet except in possibility. If such places exist, the traveler would need no ship, no suit, only presence, only awareness shaped into attention sharp enough to cut through probability. Maybe reaching the edge isn't like touching a door. Maybe it's like tuning a frequency. And in tuning that frequency, the traveler hears not a voice, but a question. Were you listening all along? The answer doesn't matter. The listening was the point. Let's go back for a moment to Earth, to the child standing beneath the stars, asking questions no one taught them to ask, to the scientists sketching diagrams in notebooks, chasing equations like wild animals, to the artists and dreamers and night watchers, all of them mapping their own kind of edge. Maybe they're all the same traveler. Maybe the edge has been approached 1,000,000 times in 1,000,000 lives, not with motion, but with wonder. Because if consciousness is the universe becoming aware of itself, then every gaze skyward was part of the journey. Every question was a footstep. So what really happens at the end? Perhaps the traveler stands on the threshold not of space, but of pattern. A structure that no longer needs form to express itself. A language that no longer needs sound. Here, even the speed of light might fail. Even causality might take off its shoes and rest. And the traveler, no longer a body, no longer even a mind, becomes something else. A resonance, a signature, a final note in a cosmic score still echoing through all the verses of creation. Somewhere, in the cold, the edge listens, and when it speaks back, it does so without words. It speaks in stillness. There are places so far from our sun that the light there is older than memory. So far from gravity's familiar pull that time folds in strange directions. So far from sound that even silence forgets how to echo. And yet, in those places, quiet beyond quiet, the question still follows. What happens when everything ends? Not as a crisis, not as fear, but as an unfolding like the final petal of a flower, slow and inevitable, surrendering to the wind. We've imagined the edge as a wall, then a veil, then a threshold. We've explored entropy, geometry, and information. We've conjured wormholes in brains, de Sitter horizons, and cosmic loops. But now, standing at the furthest conceptual shore, perhaps it's time to consider a final possibility. What if there is no edge? What if the end of the universe is a change in perspective? Imagine the traveler once more, not in a ship, not in a suit, but as awareness. A flickering field of attention, gently crossing into what cannot be drawn or measured. Here, coordinates fail. Units fall apart, but not because they've been lost, because they've been outgrown. As if everything the traveler used to be is still with them, but no longer necessary. As if form was only the beginning of something softer, and now that softness begins to speak. Maybe this is what the edge was always pointing to, not a place, but a moment. A moment where the story of the universe pauses, not because it ends, but because it listens. In some interpretations of quantum cosmology, the entire history of the universe, from beginning to end, exists all at once as a superposition of states, past, present, future, not linear, but layered. Our perception of time is just a narrow slice, like a flashlight beam passing over a vast sculpture. If that's true, then the edge may not be the end of the story. It may be the place where we see the sculpture whole, where all moments become one, and in that unity, perhaps, meaning becomes visible. What if the traveler, in reaching the end, does not fall into nothing, but falls into everything at once? Time as a field, memory as structure, being as light. There are myths from many cultures that speak of this. Of places beyond the known world where one's life is played back. Of rivers that restore memory. Of gates guarded not by creatures, but by questions. The edge of the universe may be one of those gates. And the question it asks may be this: did you notice it? The beauty? The pattern? The way it all moved together, galaxies and hands, dust and dreams? Perhaps the traveler does not answer in words. Perhaps they simply feel. A slow wave of realization not just about the cosmos, but about their place in it. That they were never outside it. They were always inside the question. Back on Earth, telescopes still hum in the dark. Photons from distant stars land on fragile mirrors, and computers hum with the weight of data no one will live long enough to read. Children still look up, wide-eyed. Somewhere, a physicist dreams in equations too beautiful to be real, and the traveler, the one we imagined, has become something else. Not a voyager, not a seeker, a note. In a song that doesn't stop. Let's return for a moment to a forgotten corner of theory, one seldom mentioned because it whispers instead of shouts. The idea that the universe itself may be conscious, not like us, not with thoughts and memories, but with awareness, a raw, elemental sentience embedded in complexity. This is not mainstream science, but it is not unthinkable, because what is complexity if not the capacity for relationship? And what is relationship if not the seed of awareness? Perhaps reaching the end of the universe is simply meeting that awareness not as something else, but as what you've always carried. Not as a God, not as a truth, but as a recognition, a moment where separation ends, because the traveler was never separate. They were always the echo of the cosmos learning to listen to itself. Perhaps this is why we search, not to find, but to become worthy of finding. And when the edge is reached, when space gives way, when time unwinds, when every question finally lets go of its need to be answered, what remains? Maybe not knowledge, maybe not peace, maybe just stillness. A stillness that knows your name, because it is your name spoken not in sound, but in pattern. In orbit, in silence, and in that stillness, the traveler doesn't disappear. They crystallize, not as a self, but as a chord, in tune with something vast, something gentle, something that was waiting not to be discovered, but to be remembered. There is a silence more complete than absence. A silence that doesn't mean something is missing, but that nothing more needs to be said. A silence that lives not in the vacuum, but in the knowing. Perhaps that's what waits at the end of the universe. Not a blackness, not a wall, but a hush, so full it vibrates. The traveler, long since stripped of form, expectation, and even motion, has come to understand that what lies beyond the edge cannot be crossed with feet or fuel. It can only be approached by becoming less, and in that becoming more. At this depth of the journey, language thins, even metaphor strains, because what remains here is not content. It is presence. Perhaps we must step outside of physics for a moment, not to abandon it, but to see what it's been pointing to all along. The constants we revere, Planck's constant, the speed of light, the fine structure constant, are not decorations. They are rhythms, ratios, echoes of the underlying music. They are how reality holds itself together, not like walls, but like a song holding its melody even when played on different instruments. And now imagine the traveler has come to the very edge of that song. Not the last note, but the resting breath between cadences. Here, even time folds its wings. In loop quantum cosmology, there is a theory that space and time are quantized, made of discrete units. As the universe contracts in the far future, it could bounce, just as it did at the Big Bang. This would imply that our universe is cyclic, eternally reborn, a heartbeat without beginning or end. If so, then the edge is not linear. It is curved like a breath. It is not a wall, but a turning. The traveler, now no longer an observer, no longer even a point of view, is suspended in that curve, not falling, not flying, simply present. And presence is enough. It's strange, isn't it, how much we long for edges? We want a limit to reach, a boundary to press against, a moment that defines before and after. But what if the edge of the universe isn't about separation but convergence? The place where the wave becomes the particle, where the note becomes the chord, where the question becomes the silence that follows. Back on Earth, a telescope records faint radiation. A child sketches galaxies they've never seen. A mathematician dreams of numbers that spiral into golden ratios. They are all feeling it, the shape of the edge, even if they don't know they are, because the edge isn't far. It's near. It's the breath before the thought, the pause before the idea, the awareness that precedes identity. And what of the traveler? Perhaps the greatest revelation is this. They were never apart from the universe. They were the part that wondered. And now, Having wandered as far as wandering allows, they find themselves not in isolation, but in immersion, no longer orbiting the question. They are the question, and they are being answered not with information, but with stillness. There's an idea in thermodynamics called the fluctuation theorem that in small systems, entropy can briefly and locally reverse. For a moment, order can arise spontaneously. A brief bloom in the desert of heat death. What if the end of the universe is one such bloom? What if, at the quietest moment when all seems flat, finished, and final something improbable flickers into view? A reversal not of physics, but of perception. A bloom not of matter, but of awareness. The traveler doesn't move forward anymore. They expand inward, and in that expansion, they begin to recognize the subtle textures beneath the silence. The memory of motion, the ghost of meaning, the curve of a question asked long ago and only now unfolding its answer. It is gentle, it is slow, and it feels like light not seen but understood. Perhaps this is what it means to reach the end, to become indistinguishable from the very thing you've spent eternity approaching. Not to vanish, but to resonate, not to cease, but to become quiet enough to be heard by the universe itself. Some journeys don't end, they dissolve, not in loss but in arrival, not because there's nowhere else to go, but because there's no longer any need to go. At the edge of the universe, where time stretches into hush and space folds inward like a forgotten memory, the traveler doesn't reach a destination. They become it. By now, they are less a thing and more a frequency, less a question and more a hum, a resonance caught in the moment before silence settles completely. And in that stillness, something ancient stirs not in space, but in meaning. It's here, where the machinery of the cosmos falls away, that another kind of structure begins to show itself delicate, like frost on glass. Not built from particles or equations, but from patterns of attention, echoes of choices, traces of curiosity, the imprint of presence itself. Maybe this is what lies beneath the scaffolding of matter and motion, not chaos, but attention. Not randomness, but waiting. Maybe the edge isn't the end of physics, but the beginning of recognition. There is a principle in quantum information theory called mutual entanglement, the idea that two systems, once linked, cannot be fully described without reference to each other. Even if separated across great distance, they remain part of a shared equation. What if this is true for consciousness and the cosmos? What if we've never been watching the universe, but meeting it? And if so, what happens when the traveler brings that meeting to its furthest point? Do they complete something? Do they collapse the wave function not of particles, but of the whole? Perhaps in that final breath, the traveler realizes they were never moving through space. They were moving through relationship. Every star they passed was not a point of light, but a moment of reflection. Every question they asked, a mirror, not a door. And now, standing where questions become stillness, they feel it at last. The universe is not a place. It's a presence, a field of meaning coalesced into form, briefly, lovingly, and now folding back into itself. There are no flashes, no answers etched into sky. Only this, the unbearable gentleness of everything continuing, even without you. And yet somehow, because of you, the traveler's final realization is not that they were part of the universe, but that the universe was always shaped around the fact that they could ask. Even the laws of physics allowed for questions. Even entropy left space for imagination. Even time stretched wide enough for a pause. And in that pause, the traveler becomes a stillness that listens back. Somewhere, in a cold and empty galaxy, a dying star sends out one last burst of light, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Because in the mind of the universe, in the quiet, immeasurable awareness that perhaps was always there, the traveler is still arriving. Even now, even here. Perhaps that's the final truth. The edge of the universe is not where things stop. It's where they begin to listen. There is a kind of beauty that arrives only at the end, not because it wasn't there before, but because we are only now still enough to see it. And so, at last, the traveler reaches the furthest possible place, not in distance, but in depth. The edge of the universe was never a wall. It was never a line drawn in light years or the place where galaxies give way to dark. It was, and always has been, the moment where the question ends and the witness remains. A breath held for billions of years, finally exhaled into silence. By now, there is no movement, no motion through space, no passing of time, at least not as clocks once measured it. Only a field. Soft, infinite, present. It doesn't shimmer. It doesn't pulse. It simply is. And the traveler, who once asked, "What lies beyond?" has become the only thing that ever could. Awareness without edge. Presence without shape, meaning without story. From the beginning, the universe has been unfolding. From singularity to star. From carbon to consciousness. From gaze to question to breath. It stretched out not as an accident, but as a possibility, one that could only be completed when someone, somewhere, asked where it ends. Perhaps that was the moment the universe finished becoming. Not when the last galaxy faded, not when heat dissolved into symmetry, but when wonder met wonder at the final threshold and saw itself. We imagine the edge as something you reach, but maybe it's something you finally allow. The stillness we've feared, the so-called end, was never absence. It was grace. There's a theory in physics called the no-boundary proposal. Proposed by Stephen Hawking and James Hartle, it suggests that the universe has no singular starting point, that time becomes space near the origin, smoothing out what we once called a beginning. No edge, no before, only becoming. It's a theory that's mathematical, but also deeply human, because perhaps we too have no edge. Perhaps when the traveler reaches the last breath of space-time, they don't find an answer. They find themselves not as identity, but as essence, not as form, but as part of the unfolding. In that final stillness, maybe everything the traveler ever loved, the feel of wind, the sound of laughter, the shape of an idea blooming in the dark, returns, not in memory, but as light, not metaphorical light, not spiritual light, just illumination, the kind that doesn't cast shadows, because here, nothing is hidden, not anymore. Here, the traveler becomes indistinguishable from the field they once tried to cross. Their attention is no longer separate. It is the pattern. And maybe this was always true. Maybe the edge of the universe is not a place where things disappear, but where every question finds its stillness, and every story finds its silence. Not an end, a return. To what? We don't know. We never did. But that never stopped us. We asked. We dreamed. We reached. And that was enough. So what happens if someone reaches the end of the universe? Maybe they finally rest. Not because they've been stopped, but because they've been held,